Welcome. My name is James Kirchick. I'm a global reporter with Axel Springer. It's an honor to be here today. And the format for this panel is I'm going to introduce the speakers one by one. They will go up and deliver a 5-minute spiel, I guess, and then we'll engage in conversation. So first is Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who is the former Commanding General of Army Europe. Ben, take the floor. You can go up there, or is there a microphone? Yeah, whatever you prefer. Oh, sorry, I should say, the theme today, as it says on the screen, is the role of defense in the sort of perennial question, but now much more important question, can Europe defend itself? So, thank you.
Okay, so let me compliment the organizers. The video that you showed this morning at the beginning of the conference was excellent. I mean, some incredible images, but I wanted to highlight what was missing from the video, but yet it's relevant to our topic. There were 15 million American soldiers that served in West Germany from the end of the war until the end of the Cold War. There were millions of soldiers of the German Bundeswehr, the British Army, French Army, the Dutch, and on and on and on. So the wall didn't just collapse because of poor masonry. It collapsed because the West made it clear that we were prepared to do whatever it took for as long as it took to help eventually Germany to be able to reunify. So that's kind of the point of what I'm going to say today. Of course, there were a lot of factors, including the civilians, but it didn't come without enormous military expenses and determination to show that we were prepared if there ever was going to be a war, that we were prepared. And that's going to be the key point I'd want to make here in the next 4.5 minutes. What's going on in this war, first of all? Because if we talk about can Europe defend itself against what? This war has been going on for 11 and a half years, not 4 years, 11 and a half years. That's very important, I think. The narrative of the inevitability of a Russian victory has been shattered because of people like this incredible young woman that we just listened to, what Ukraine has accomplished. So the idea that somehow, come on, Russia's going to win, that has been destroyed. In fact, after 11 and a half years, the Russians still only control about 20% of Ukraine. And I think it's clear that they cannot win. They're not going to be able to overwhelm or overrun Ukrainian defenders the way that maybe their grandfathers would have done, because they don't have that capability. Now, the Ukrainians cannot yet push the Russians back to live in their own borders, but they have stopped them. And I think the Ukrainian theory of victory is based on their continued attacks on Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. And as they continue to hammer away at that with things that they make plus what we might give them, then I think we get to a point where Russia might not be able to pay for this war anymore. But I do think a year from now, it's going to look a lot like it does now. Gray zone operations. Sometimes I hear people talk about these Russian drone incursions into Poland. I would get rid of the word incursion. These are operations, which means they're planned, they're coordinated, they're resourced, and they are intended, number one, to distract us from helping Ukraine. That's the main reason for these drone operations, the continued sabotage of infrastructure, the disinformation. All of this is designed to make us lose confidence in each other and to distract us from supporting Ukraine. We have to figure out how do you stop that? And first of all, you have to do it by recognizing that the Russians are at war with us, even if we wish it were not so. And if we don't stop it, then we will, in fact, end up in a kinetic conflict. My country, the United States, of course, we're going through a very, very challenging time right now. There's no other, I should be blunt about that. But relevant to our panel today, the administration has not yet released its new national defense strategy. But I think we can see, based on what they're doing and what they're saying, that the four main priorities are, number one, Western Hemisphere. Homeland security is always at the top of the list, but now very specifically Western Hemisphere, North America, Central America, South America. This is where the administration is going to place its priority, including of resources. The second is in the Indo-Pacific region. The third, I think, is probably the Middle East, not because of Israel as much as because I think this administration really desperately wants to do business with the Saudis and others in the region. And then Europe is probably fourth of those four regions. And we've already heard announcements of troop reductions in Romania. I anticipate we're going to see more of that. I don't know how much more or how fast, but I think that's what it feels like. Finally, what should Europe do? Number one, help Ukraine win. That's the best way to make sure that there's never a fight, that Europe is not involved in a conflict with Russia, is help the Ukrainians are not asking for a single soldier. They just need the tools. So that should be our priority. Number two, acknowledge that Russia is at war with us. And this is where our leaders and influencers should talk to all of us as if we are adults. Explain what the risk is, explain what's at stake. And then finally, you prevent war by preparing for war. That's the best way to make sure that Germany is never attacked, that Poland is never attacked, is to make it clear that we are ready. And I think it feels like we're making progress there. We're just not there yet.
Thank you, Ben. Our next speaker is First Counsellor Markus Woelke, who's the Vice President for the Federal Academy for Security Policy and a major in the Bundeswehr. Is that right? Major. Oh, sorry. Okay. The info sheet they gave me was a little messed up, but okay. You're next.
Yes, thank you very much for having me here. I will take a little bit of a different kind of angle, a bit more civilian, a bit more European, as I'm here with two military representatives. Reflect a little bit on this term Zeitenwende and take stock Zeitenwende. So this is the expression coined by our former Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, 3 days after the beginning of a Russian war on Ukraine. And so what does this mean? It's so a kind of a turning point, watershed moment, epochal shift. So this very first phrase in this speech says, so we experience an epochal shift. This means the world after is not like the world before. And I wanted to underline this very element. We still use the term crisis in describing the world we live in. But the term is misleading because it kind of implies, oh, one day it will be over. Then it's like before. So perhaps we just have to wait. But no, this is fundamentally wrong. And this implies this term Zeitenwende for me, so I still use it quite often. And so what does this mean? Disruptive technologies. We will come to it just in the next panel. Tipping points, climate. You know, the COP30 starts just today. So I just hint you at the UN report on tipping points. And 2/3 are already met. UNHCR speaks of 250 million refugees due to climate. So this means 70 over the last 10 years. So it's 70,000 per day. But of course, this term means what Ben just described, this geopolitical tectonic shift, the uncertainties, the power struggle, the war. So what implications for Europe? As one other phrase I like to quote from this speech of Olaf Scholz, says, Europe is our framework for action. So whatever Germany is doing is in a European framework or a European understanding. So I want to quote just the beginning of the State of the Union address from Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission in September. Europe is in a fight for peace, for free and independent Europe, a fight for our values and our democracies, a fight for our liberty and our ability to determine our destiny for ourselves. So that's what it's all about, and we're in it together. So she said there as well, so there's no room or time for nostalgia. In the white paper on European defense readiness, so we sum that up with history will not forgive us for inaction. So what do we have to do? Just as Ben said, we have to support Ukraine with everything we have, politically, militarily, economically, humanitarian. And politically means as well EU accession. Because with all this kind of military talk on security, there's an EU perspective for Ukraine. And this is all linked kind of together. So Zeitenwende quickly. So a lot, in particular in Germany, will argue, okay, we have not done enough, we have not done it fast enough, but we should be more confident. Just as Ben said, we are still fighting. So we can be, say, more courageous. Germany is a key player, because we are the biggest country, the most powerful economic country in Europe. Say, from a military point of view, we are the kind of hub, the logistic hub in the center. So, and we've done some of our homework. Now we have a National Security Council. It just met for the first time last week. First steps. We reshaped our army. We have now a joint operational command. We have an operational plan for Germany for this task of, say, logistic hub. We have a fighting brigade now permanently set up in Lithuania. Things impossible to think of a couple of years ago. Ask any German soldier, which said, not possible. We do it. Heavy investment in capabilities, in infrastructure. Just one hint, 35 billion are announced on space capabilities from Germany. So things move. NATO, EU role, how can this interact? I think it's getting more and more clear. Of course, NATO role for deterrence and collective defense, but the EU is there to support, give the incentives, the funding, regulation, policy, industry. But what is more, or even as important than military, it's the civilian side. So it's about resilience. So it's about the cohesion, the resilience, and the preparedness of our societies. And the same week, the EU issued the white paper on defense readiness. It issued as well the Preparedness Union Strategy, based on the Ministry report, the former Finnish president. So we really look a lot to our Scandinavian friends, Finns, Swedes, the Balts, who are kind of a role model on comprehensive security, on total defense, how all civilian actors kind of interact. Well, to get us kind of ready. In Germany, so we call it integrated security or policy for integrated security. That's enshrined in our national security strategy. We adopted in 2023, so our first national strategy. And so it's a whole of government, whole of society approach. And we need so this civil engagement to supplement what we do on the military side. And we've seen that today in the conference as well. No? Civil society, state, politics, education, innovation, tech, business, art, media, they all have to engage, not just to protect freedom and human rights, but also to protect our security and defense. So I come to the end. A last little token, as this is as well today, on Zeitenwende, kind of in Germany. The Protestant Church today issued a paper, kind of a white paper strategy. So in the Catholic world, it would be an encyclical, a papal letter. So the Memorandum on Peace in a World of Disorder. So the last one was from 2007. It was very pacifistic, not very much on international cooperation. But now the new text that came out today, it reflects the security environment we're living in, the hybrid attacks, in a very differentiated manner. And it clearly shows the ethical dilemmas we live, say, with defense, with deterrence, with the use of weapons. But it states clearly, first and foremost, the state has to protect its citizens from violence. And this takes precedent over everything else. And then just peace means protect from violence, foster freedom, reduce inequalities, and strengthen plurality. So we know what to do. As I said, history will not forgive us for inaction. So we have to be courageous. Then I get to Philipp to say a bit what he's doing, as each and everyone can do something each and every day. And as President Lackner, she's the president of our Technical Disaster Relief Organization, THW, she calls it EMMA principle, in German, so einfach mal machen. So just do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Markus. I was not aware of that statement by the Protestant Church. I think that's actually a very big deal for the church to come out and say that in Germany. So last, we have Major Philipp Wolf, who is a major in the Bundeswehr and the commander of a Franco-German brigade. That's what it says there, no? Am I wrong? Is in the Franco-German brigade. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't want to violate military protocol here. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now I'll bring us down to the lowest tactical level. So I'm a company commander, and I'll focus a little bit on what soldiers in the German army do since the famous Zeitenwende speech that was just announced. I'm not the spokesperson of the army, but I'll give you my own opinion about what is happening. But first of all, why are we here? We saw just in the Ukrainian officer before. There's war in Europe. Civilians are bombarded, soldiers die in the trenches, and an imperial regime is trying to overthrow another liberal society. And those are not headlines from 1914 or 1939. Just 2 flight hours today from here, Ukraine is fighting for its life. And me and my soldiers, we trade day in, day out, that this does not happen here in Berlin. So I'm currently a company commander inside the French-German Brigade, stationed just outside of Strasbourg. Up until the German Brigade in Lithuania, the only permanently stationed unit outside of Germany, is a sign of German and French friendship. In the next 5 minutes, I want to let you walk in my boots and let you understand what do we do as a company, what do I do as a company commander, and what I, Philipp Wolf, believe we all need to do who are here. Again, my goal is to take you into my world since the famous Zeitenwende speech. So what do? We are a reconnaissance company, so we are ultimately tasked with providing my next superior with the information that he needs in order to get to a decision. And with that, I have 109 men and women that fight with me. Who are we? As I walk through Berlin on Saturday and Sunday, I get a little feeling that my company is a little bit like mini Berlin, because in my company, we come from all ways of life. It doesn't matter in my company if you're black or white, if you're gay or straight, or if you're poor or rich. We all fight for the freedom to protect each and one of you who is here. And for that fight, we have different capabilities available. I have radar detectors in my company that can detect the launch of an FPV drone that we see day in, day out in Ukraine, 20 kilometers away. I have classical reconnaissance assets, such as the Fennec tank, which can screen deep behind enemy lines, and I have dismounted guys who are very good at what they do in cities and villages. And shortly after this conference, I will deploy to Belgium, where we will participate in the biggest Belgian reconnaissance exercise in years, Yellow Guardian, where French, German, Dutch, Luxembourg, and Belgian soldiers will train together, what we see every day in Ukraine. Attack of drones, treating wounded, treating our fallen comrades, and providing the information that the next higher headquarters needs in order to make a decision. We prepare rigorously for this exercise in order to make sure that we will prevail on the battlefield, because on the battlefield there is only victory or there's death. What do? I am responsible for the welfare of my soldiers, for the 109 men and women that I lead. And I do that by preparing them what is about to come, the challenges of war, which are devastating, as we've seen from the statement of the Ukrainian soldiers. So we do a lot of physical training to make my soldiers resilient. I do a lot of weapons training, shooting with our hand rifles, with our tanks, and so on and so forth, and a lot of medical training to treat our wounded if necessary. So to give you an idea about my day, that usually starts around 5:30. So I'm up by 4:30 and leave my home, be at work by 5:30 to prepare myself for the day before we all go into training of all those different things, medical training, shooting, etc., from 7:30 on with the 109 soldiers that I have. As you can also imagine, I'm German, so I also have to deal with a lot of paperwork day in, day out, which should be no surprise to everyone here. And that day goes roughly until 5:30, until I come home to my wife and my 2 children, who are not only my safe haven, but also my motivation to do what I do. I want them to grow up in the same free and liberal society that I had a chance to grow up in. And so after I bring my kids to bed around 8:30, they're 3.5 and 1.5, I go back to work, because then we go into night training in order to prepare what is to come. An exhausting and yet rewarding job, the best job I ever had, besides being the father to my 2 girls at home. And so last but not least, what do we all need to do as we sit here and discuss? I think security and freedom is not only dependent on me as a soldier and the soldiers that I lead, who ultimately defend and who will in case, give the ultimate sacrifice, their life, to protect your freedom. It is also our duty as citizens to defend our values, to go vote, to exercise the rights that we have here, and to fund armies. And if you only take a few things from my short input, it should be this. We soldiers, we do everything in our power to be ready to defend you and your values. Trust me, we are ready. But security doesn't end with us as soldiers. It is all our duty to prepare and defend our values, whether to exercise your right to vote or through personal service. We see many brave people here who do the best they can to make the world a better place. And lastly, and that is something I'm convinced, and we heard it from Sir Ben Hodges, we, my company at the Bundeswehr, NATO, I've been at NATO's eastern flank for the previous 4 years. I am convinced that we will be ready for any threat that is posed and geared towards our societies. Every inch of our territory, whether it be Berlin, Warsaw, or Vilnius, it will be defended. And so I want to leave you with this beacon of hope, because hope is a good thing and a good thing never dies. Freedom will prevail, freedom will be defended, and freedom must be defended. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philipp, for those remarks and for your service as well. There's a strong argument being made, in the United States certainly, but also across Europe, at the governmental level in Hungary and Slovakia, and among major political movements across the European continent, the AfD in this country, that Ukraine is not a vital security interest, and that we should just let Putin have it. That's all he wants. He has no designs on Poland. He does not want to go to war with NATO because he knows he would lose. Can you explain why that understanding of the conflict is wrong? We'll just go one by one. Yeah, we'll start with Ben.
Well, first of all, anybody that believes that really does not understand who Russia is or who Vladimir Putin is. That all they want is Ukraine, then they're good. There's nowhere in their history would that be true. But you're right that there are millions of Americans and other Europeans who are like, okay, bad luck for Ukraine. Why does that affect us? It affects us because for the United States, Europe is our biggest and most important economic partner. So America's prosperity is tied to European prosperity, and European prosperity depends on stability and security. So Russia's war against Ukraine has completely disrupted energy and food supplies. It's put millions of Ukrainian refugees on the road into Central and Western Europe. So all of these things are bad for our prosperity. That's a purely pragmatic reason why it matters to all of us. So what we're doing is not charity for Ukraine, it's in our interest. Secondly, of course, if Russia is successful in Ukraine, it will only be because we have failed Ukraine, and Russia will absorb tens of thousands of trained Ukrainian soldiers with all their equipment that will be forced into the Red Army, and then obviously they'll be emboldened to expand the war into Moldova and even into a NATO country. Now you've got U.S. troops and other NATO troops are going to be involved directly in the conflict if we fail. And then the third reason, of course, is China. The Chinese are watching to see, are we serious about sovereignty, international law? Are we reliable as an ally? If we cannot help Ukraine stop a very weak Russia, then I don't think the Chinese will be very impressed with anything that we might say.
Not a lot to add, perhaps just say from the perspective of the German government, say we're not at war, but we're not at peace anymore. That's what the Chancellor says, the Minister of Defense, and it's happening. So every day. And so this is, we already see how this kind of zapping of our, as well of democracy, of our, so what our kind of way of life, this is what is at stake. Yeah? And so we see the narratives that are kind of defended. So we see as well, so what do we have to do to kind of activate the positive side. So, no? So we have to look not just what we kind of fear, but do we want to protect. And I think that's the kind of main shift, and that's why this conference is very valuable to put the focus more on this element. And just a more, say perhaps an anecdote. I learned that in Lithuania, my last visit, it seems that there's an historical museum in St. Petersburg, and there you have kind of the paintings of the different tsars and so in Russian history, and you have kind of a red and a green button. Green is those who made Russia bigger, and the red one is when it became smaller. Well, and I think it's quite clear what Putin wants. He wants a green button.
We may need that in America for Canada soon. So,
I think this question goes directly into what you just mentioned. We are not legally at war, but we are not at peace for a long time. When will Russia stop? Will they stop at Ukraine? Well, they did not stop at Georgia. They did not stop at Chechnya. They did not stop when they gained the Donbas or... And so I think this is, again, the ongoing hybrid warfare that targets us through different channels, whether it be TikTok or whatever, to present these narratives that are false. Because I think the intention of this opponent has been set clear. It is not the country, Ukraine, that he's fighting. It is an idea that he's fighting, the idea of a liberal and free and prosperous democracy that ultimately also challenge their own society and their not so prosperous society. And so I think that is the target. And so we should be very careful because, again, the hybrid warfare is going on. There are drones at Berlin airport. There are burning warehouses in Warsaw, which are gray zone activities, hybrid activities. And as Ben Hodges said, those are not single ideas of single individuals. That is a campaign that is going on and the start of something bigger.
So the title of this session is "Can Europe Defend Itself?" And I think we'll take that as sort of a more, not literally, because I don't think if there was no U.S. Involvement, I think Europe would have a difficult time defending itself. But how capable is Europe on its own now, particularly given what's happening in Washington and the fear that the United States is withdrawing from Europe?
So if the question is, can Europe defend itself? Hell, yes, it can. Of course it can. If you combine together the economies, the militaries, the wealth, the technology, the populations, the industry of all the countries of the EU, plus Norway, plus UK, and then even Canada, it dwarfs Russia. It dwarfs Russia. And I don't understand why there is such a lack of self-confidence in Europe. In fact, you're always worrying about, I live in Frankfurt, so I have some firsthand experience with this. My friends are like, oh, no, the Russians might do this, they might do this. And I think the Russians should be very worried that they will provoke Europe into doing something. If Europe would act with more self-confidence, of course it would be difficult.
And there's also the nuclear question. Is France really going to use, or Britain going to employ those in defense of Lithuania?
Well, you don't have to have 5,000 nuclear weapons to deter Russia's 5,000 nuclear weapons. The Russians just have to believe that if they were to use a nuclear weapon, then St. Petersburg and Moscow would be hit, would be severely damaged. So the deterrent comes, and you don't even have to use a nuclear weapon to do that. There are other things that can be done. Obviously, the fact that we're even having this discussion pains me as an American, that people are not confident in the United States. And I still think as the fact that you're not certain, this administration still recognizes that our own economic interests are so important, and that there are tens of thousands of Americans that live and work in Europe, and thousands of American businesses. So I just don't see a completely turning their back.
Markus?
If I may quote, hell, we can and we will, yes. Yes, so I said that before. You said we have to be more confident. We have to get our act together. Of course, we're bureaucratic. Things are, well, we have this complexity. So how do we get the people on board? So that's the main question. But there are good examples. Yes, look at the Nordics, how they fit. No? And Putin wanted to divide us. What has he achieved? The Finns and Swedes are in NATO. And they make a real contribution. So this is what can inspire us, I think. That's for our academy. We bring our groups in the different countries to see firsthand experience this, get a kind of a positive motivation perhaps from it. Of course, Germany is a big country. It's more complex. We have federalism. But there perhaps a lot of things. Okay, we have this tanker. We do not manage reforms. But we do, and federalism as well means redundancy. No? As well, this is kind of resilience. So not all eggs in the same basket. So we have to focus more on the positive things and put them together, this kind of Team Europe idea. Yeah? And like what I said, de facto EU, NATO, and we will not have the perfect plan, but we'll manage.
Yeah, second, I also would quote Ben Hodges, hell yeah. In my previous assignment, I was the aide-de-camp to the corps commander of Multinational Corps Northeast, who's based in Chechen. So aide-de-camp is like an executive assistant to a 3-star general. And I was there on the day of the Russian invasion into Ukraine, and very quickly we developed very credible plans without going into detail because they're all secret or top secret. But it strengthened my own belief in NATO. NATO will be there with everything it has. And the European forces itself, like Ben Hodges said, are quite good at what they do. And we will be there. And on the other hand, for example, the Ukrainians also look to us to some respect, right? They not only look to us to ask for equipment, for tanks, and so on and so forth, but my company, for example, we train Ukrainian soldiers over and over again. In 2023, we trained over 1,000 soldiers from the front line back to the front line. In 2024, we trained over 1,000 soldiers. And next year, we will train again Ukrainian soldiers to go back and to fight and win this terrible war. So I think we are playing our own part. And what we also should not forget that the public eye tends to be a little bit more negative about how things are, especially concerning the German Bundeswehr, which was painted very differently 3 years ago than it is painted today.
And that's actually a question I want to ask. Sweden recently brought back conscription. And that's a dramatic change for a country that was, until a couple of years ago, neutral in its foreign policy, to now have conscription. You've worked with all of our allied militaries across the continent. Do you think that reintroducing conscription is something that needs to be considered? And obviously, when we talk about the German context, that's a very loaded issue, obviously, and I'm curious what you think of that.
So conscription has to be a decision for each country. It won't work for everybody because there's cultural reasons and demographic reasons. I think that each nation, though, needs to figure out how do you unleash the talent of all your young women and men who want to serve. I think, we don't have, the U.S. Army is 20% female. And that was not because we all of a sudden became woke. Whatever that means is because there's not enough men to meet the requirements. And so the Army had to get serious about how do you attract talented, fit young women to want to be in the infantry or fly a helicopter or do whatever. And I think, to be honest, most European countries, surprisingly, are a few years behind on that. That this is an area, whether you do it with conscription or all volunteer, going after the talented women that are out there, because you need that brain power, not just to carry equipment. But I think this is where our civilian leaders have to explain this is what's required, and but it's not just the Bundeskanzler or the defense minister, it's parents and teachers that also. And the last thing I'd say, most German universities do not allow research and development that can be used for the military, which is something left over from the 60s. And that's, each of the Bundesländer can make a decision what they want to do there. But what a terrible signal you send to young people that somehow defense is bad if R&D and all these incredible German universities cannot be used to help improve defense.
Yeah, I'll take up the question. Two things. One, big picture, and second thing, personal. Big picture, if we think that there's a credible threat to this country, then quantity, it's its own quality. If you think about a full-scale war that needs to be fought against an opponent, then you need forces that are big, 500,000 plus or whatever the number might be. But every big-scale war has shown us that it will also be about numbers. Ukraine is the best example. And they're also not drafting everyone, right? This is also important to keep in mind. Not every 18-year-old is at war in Ukraine. And secondly, I am also a child of conscription. I was the second to last year to be drafted, which is a reason why I sit here today. I became a soldier because I needed to, and I felt that it was my duty and obligation as a citizen. And I stayed in the army because I fell in love with the profession of being an officer and a soldier.
So my personal wish would be for 1 year of engagement. Not just military, civil as well. That's constitution-wise in Germany. It's complicated, but there we have clear majorities for that, and that in this world we know from. So we very much work with volunteers in Germany. So I mentioned THW, 90,000 volunteers working on disaster relief. So all our support, our blue light system works with volunteers. So we know how to do this. But say the offer is not really matching sometimes, well, what young people expect. But young people are engaged and they are political. And all studies show that. And just today we have a public hearing on this conscription law in Parliament. And for the first time, at least, so, but what was the opposition parties who invited youth representatives, because we cannot just discuss about what they should do, but with them. And then I'm quite sure we will find a workable solution. But we need engagement in all fields, and it has to make sense. And then people will be on board, and young people as well. I'm very confident about it.
Great. Thank you all for your contributions this evening. And unfortunately, we have to end. So let's hear a round of applause for our panel.